Mrs. November's Dinner Party by Agnes Carr. The widow November was very busy indeed this year. What with the elections and harvest homes, her hands were full to overflowing, for she takes great interest in politics, besides being a social body, without whom no Applebee or corn husking is complete. Still, worn out as she was, when her 30 sons and daughters clustered around and begged that they might have their usual family dinner on Thanksgiving Day, she could not find it in her hospitable heart to refuse, and immediately invitations were sent to her 11 brothers and sisters, Old Father Time and Mother Year, to come with all their families and celebrate the holiday. At length all was ready. The happy day had come, and all the little Novembers in their best bib and tucker were seated in a row, awaiting the arrival of their uncles and aunts and cousins, while their mother, in russet brown silk, trimmed with misty lace, looked them over, straightening Guy Fawkes's collar, tying Thanksgiving's neck ribbon, and settling a dispute between two little presidential candidates as to which should sit at the head of the table. Soon, a merry clashing of bells, blowing of horns, and mingling of voices were heard outside. Sleighs and carriages dashed up to the door, and in came, just in season, Grandpa Time and Grandma Year leaning on his arm, followed by all their children and grandchildren, and were welcomed by the hostess and her family. "Oh, how glad I am we could all come today," said Mr. January in his crisp, clear tones, throwing off his great fur coat and rushing to the blazing fire. "There's nothing so happy like the return of these days." "Nothing indeed," simpered Mrs. February, the poetess. "If I had come in time, I should have composed some verses for the occasion, but my son Valentine brought a sugar heart with a sweet sentiment on it to his cousin Thanksgiving. I too have taken the liberty of bringing a sort of adopted child of mine, young Leap Year, who makes us a visit every 4 years. "He is very welcome, I am sure," said Mrs. November, patting Leap Year kindly on the head. "And Sister March, how have you been since we last met?" "Oh, we have had the north, south, east, and west winds all at our house, and they have kept things breezy, I assure you. But I really fear we should not get here today, for when we came to dress, I found nearly everything we had was lent, so that must be accounted for in our shabby appearance." tittered little April Fool. "What a sell!" And he shook until the bells on his cap rang, at which his father ceased for a moment showering kisses on his nieces and nephews, and called him for his rudeness. "Oh, Aunt May, do tell us a story," clamored the younger children, and dragged her into a corner, and she was soon deep in such a moving tale that they were all melted to tears, especially the little Aprils, who cry very easily. Meanwhile, Mrs. June, assisted by her youngest daughter, a sweet graduate, just from school, was engaged in decking the apartment with roses and lilies and other fragrant flowers that she had brought from her extensive gardens and conservatories, until the room was a perfect bower of sweetness and beauty. While Mr. July draped the walls with flags and banners, lit the candles, and showed off the tricks of his pet eagle, Yankee Doodle, to the great delight of the little ones. Madame Auguste, who suffers a great deal with the heat, found a seat on a comfortable sofa as far away from the fire as possible, and waved a huge feather fan back and forth, while her 31 boys and girls, led by the 2 oldest, Holiday and Vacation, ran riot through the long rooms, picking at their Aunt June's flowers and playing all sorts of pranks, regardless of the tumbled hair and torn clothes, while they shouted, "Hurrah for fun!" and behaved like a pack of wild colts let loose in a green pasture, until their Uncle September called them, together with his own children, into the library and persuaded them to read some of the books, which the shelves were filled, or play quietly with the game of authors and the dissected maps. "Ah," said Mr. September to Mrs. October, "I think Sister August lets her children romp too much. I always like improving games for mine, although I have a great trouble to make Equinox toe the line as he should." "That is because you're a schoolmaster," said Mrs. October, shaking her head, adorned with a wreath of gaily tinted leaves. "But where is my baby?" At that moment a cry was heard without, and Summer came in to say that the little All Hallows had fallen in a tub of water while trying to catch an apple that was floating on top, and Mrs. October rushed off to the kitchen and returned with her youngest in a very wet and dripping condition, and screaming at the top of his lusty little lungs, and could only be consoled by a handful of chestnuts, which his nurse, Miss Frost, cracked open for him. The little Novembers, meanwhile, were having a charming time with their favorite cousins, the Decembers, who were always so gay and jolly, and had a delightful papa. He came in with his pocket stuffed full of toys and sugar plums, which he drew out from time to time, and gave to his child Christmas to distribute among the children, who eagerly danced around their cousin, saying, "Christmas comes but once a year, but when she comes she brings good cheer." At which Mary laughed gaily, tossed her golden curls, which were twined with sprays of holly and clusters of brilliant scarlet berries. At last the great folding doors were thrown open. It was announced that dinner was served, and a long procession of old and young quickly formed, led by Mrs. November and her daughter Thanksgiving, whose birthday it was. They filed into the spacious dining room, where stood the long table groaning beneath the weight of good things, while the family continually ran in and out, bringing more substantials and delicacies to grace the board and please the appetite. Winter staggered beneath great trenchers of meat and poultry, pies and puddings. Spring brought the earliest and freshest of vegetables. Summer the richest creams and ices, while autumn served the guests with fruit and poured sparkling wine. All were happy and jolly, and many a joke was cracked at the contents of each plate and dish melted away like snow before the sun, and the great fires roared with the wide chimneys as though singing a glad Thanksgiving song. New Year's drank to everybody's health and wished them many happy returns of the day, while Twelfth Night ate so much cake he made himself quite ill and had to be put to bed. Valentine sent mottos to all the little girls and praised their bright eyes and glossy curls. His mother said, "He is a sad flatterer, and not nearly so truthful, I am sorry to say, as his brother, George Washington, who has never told a lie." At which Father Time gave George a quarter and said he should always remember what a good boy he is. After dinner, the fun increased, all trying to do something for the general amusement. Mrs. March persuaded her son St. Patrick to dance an Irish jig, which he did to the tune of "The Wearing of the Green," which his brothers, Windy and Gusty, blew and whistled on their fingers. Easter sang a beautiful song, the little Mays tripped the light fantastic in pretty fancy dance, while the June sat by smiling so sweet it was a pleasure to look at them. Independence, the fourth child of Mr. July, who is a bold little fellow and a fine speaker, gave them an oration he had learned at school, and the August suggested games of tag and blindman's buff, which all enjoyed heartily. Mr. September tried to read an instructive story out loud, but was interrupted by Equinox, April Fool, and all Little Hallows, who pinned streamers to his coat-tails, covered him with flour, and would not let him get through a line. At which Mr. October hugged her tricksy baby and laughed until she cried, and Mr. September retired in disgust. "That is almost too bad," said Mrs. November as she shook the popper vigorously, which the corn was popping and snapping merrily. "But Thanksgiving, you must not forget to thank your cousins for all they have done to honor your birthday." At which the demure little maiden went around to each one and returned her thanks in such a charming way that it was quite captivating. Grandmother Year at last began to nod over her teacup in the chimney corner. "It is growing late," said Grandpa Time. "But we must have a Virginia reel before we go," said Mr. December. "Oh, yes, yes!" cried the children. Merry Christmas played a lively air on the piano, and the old and young took their positions on the polished floor with Grandpa and Grandma at the head. Midsummer danced with Happy New Year, June's commencement with August holiday, Leap Year with May Day, and all went merry as a marriage bell. The fun was at its height when suddenly the clock in the corner struck 12. Grandma Year motioned for all to stop, and Grandfather Time, bowing his head, said softly, "Hark, my children, Thanksgiving Day has ended."